Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen Leathers. Good morning, Helen. How are you?
Good morning, Tom. I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
How are you?
I'm on top of the world this morning.
Lovely, love that metaphor. In my head, I now see you on a globe, standing waving at me from the top of the world. I'm very visual.
Great balance.
You do.
Lovely.
Today we're going to be talking about personality, aren't we?
We are, yes, and in particular personality profiling. We've not really done an episode on personality.
No.
We did an episode early on around introversion and extroversion, which is one of the elements that tends to get incorporated within talk about personality. And I think has a lot to, in terms of the social dynamics, that has a lot of interplay, doesn't it? So that we're going to do a much broader episode today about personality profiling, the use of psychometrics in looking at personality, and see where we go with that. Okay.
Before we start, just to give some extra credibility to this topic,
yes.
You're trained in a number of personality profiles.
Trained in a number of personality profiles. So I'm trained in Myers-Briggs, MBTI. I'm trained in Hogan, which is a trait-based. So MBTI is type-based, which we'll cover in a moment. Hogan is trait-based. I'm trained in something called EQI, which is emotional intelligence profiling, and Belbin, which is team roles, which you could say, well, is that personality? But it is. It's definitely a personality.
Personality within a team.
Yeah. So those are the four main ones that I've dabbled in a few others, but those are the main ones.
And obviously, it's got a degree of crossover with psychology, which you've studied. And
yes. Certainly on my psychology degree, we did quite a lot of work around personality. So all of this stuff was familiar to me before I started to get involved in getting licensed to run some profiling for people.
Okay, so that's good. That's your background.
Yeah. I think I know my stuff.
You know your stuff, yes. So where shall we start then?
Where should we start? Should we start with the Greeks? I'd say that because just interestingly, there's a profile called DISC that really does go back to the Greeks and the idea of having four humours. I can't remember what they are now. Phlegmatic, sanguine.
Yeah, funny names.
Yeah. So they do sort of say, well, this is where it all started. But and I think even then that was related to the four elements: the earth, wind, fire, water.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's always been around as something that people noticing the difference in people's personality and going, well, he's phlegmatic.
That sounds delightful.
Or he's fiery.
Well, we use that language, don't we? That metaphorical language.
Yeah, and certainly we'll talk about them later, but certainly within some psychometrics, they come up as a shorthand for fiery red is a personality type in one of the psychometrics.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's where it started. But really, it's since the 1920s, that's when it really started to be introduced as a test, as a profiling tool. I think Galton back in the 19th century started to explore whether we could test. I think a lot of his was that, what's it called? Was it phrenology, where the bumps on your head? And they started to think about how they could decide what someone's personality was. But the testing sort of came in about the 20s.
Phrenology isn't a thing, right? Have they disproven that?
I've no idea. It's not something I've explored, the research behind it. It could well be a thing.
I don't think
I'm open to it being a thing. I've got a few bumps on my head. I wonder what they mean. And interestingly, one of the early tests that came out was the DISC thing was William Marston, who created Wonder Woman, was also a psychologist who created DISC profiling.
I'm always blown away by that. It always feels like I've never heard it before and it's new information to me, but I have heard it so many times.
Yeah.
It just seems like such an odd
There's no
mix.
reason why sort of a comic book creator couldn't also be a psychologist.
No, of course.
Yeah. But interesting. So where we've landed with it now, and we've kind of landed in a place where there are two main theories of personality. And obviously, we could go into much broader psychological definitions, but two main theories. One is type theory and one is trait theory. Type theory originates with Carl Jung, and that's when we talked about introversion, extroversion. That's his concept. So he had the idea of we have these four elements to our personality. So introversion, extroversion, judging and perceiving, intuition and sensing, and thinking and feeling. So those were his four dichotomies, his four areas of personality.
So when you say four dichotomies, they are like four spectrums with one at one end and one at the other end?
His was kind of, well, you're either this or
you're either this or that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're either introvert or an extrovert. You're either judging or perceiving.
Yeah, you have that way of being.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was much more complex for him, so they all interplayed, but those were the four main areas. And that's still around. It's still, so MBTI is based on that theory. But obviously it's one man's theory. He wasn't a researcher. He came up with this by thinking about the world. That's what he came up with. Obviously an awful lot of research has been done on the back of it to see whether it fits. And I think the jury is still out on whether each of those elements are valid as you're measuring what you're measuring. I think introversion, extroversion, people definitely think you're measuring that. But some of the other areas, it's still a little bit of, are they valid or not? So alongside that, later, trait theory emerged as a concept. And this was really looking at linguistics and looking at the words we use to describe people. And the researchers took thousands of words that we used to describe personality and really just boiled it down to 5 different elements. So we have openness to ideas, creativity, the world, just being open to the world. Mm-hmm. We have conscientiousness. We have extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
And these are known as the big 5 in psychology.
The big 5, yeah. I was thinking of wildlife when I think of the big 5, lions and elephants. I think. So those are the two sort of competing theories, I guess. And a lot of academics will say, well, type theory has no research backing to it. Although there is a lot of research done by people that use type theory. But it sort of follows on from the original concept. Whereas trait theory is very much about the original concept of, okay, what are the things that describe people universally? So this across the world, what are the big 5? And one of the criticisms of type theory is it's based on an individualistic Western culture that doesn't transfer well to more collectivistic Eastern cultures. So if you're talking to someone in China about the different types, they might have a totally different understanding of what that means.
Research done only in a Western educated society. How unusual.
Yeah. Although not anymore, because obviously, China and India have huge research ventures going on. So they probably do more research than anyone else now.
Yeah. And it is now that new wave of research in recent years where can this be reproduced in other societies and in other populations.
Yeah. Lots of people will say, well, the type theory is a thing. Jung had a point and that's perfectly valid. Other people will say, well, no, it's the big 5. And actually, if you try and map them across, they do map across quite well. So introversion and extroversion is definitely applies to both, although in the big 5, they just talk about extroversion and you're somewhere on a scale of extroversion. They don't call the opposite introversion.
So if you had low extroversion, by your very nature, you would be an introvert?
Yes, according to Jung. Whereas in the big 5, you're just low on extroversion.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Agreeableness tends to correlate to the thinking-feeling dichotomy. So if you're high on agreeableness, you are likely to have a feeling preference, be interested in people, be empathetic. If you're high on thinking, you'd be low on agreeableness potentially.
Just the nuance between the two there, you've said very people focused.
Yes.
And then the thinking would be someone literally thinking about a situation.
More task-focused,
More task-focused.
goal-focused, yeah.
Okay.
Not so much interested in how people feel about stuff or how they feel about stuff. It's a very logical, analytical way of being.
And then we have judging.
So judging and perceiving is really about that conscientiousness. So judging people tend to be planful. They like to complete a task, move on to the next task, which is conscientiousness, isn't it?
Yeah.
People with a perceiving preference tend to be much more last minute, go with the flow, don't really like to plan. We know a few people like that.
We know a couple.
And a couple of people in this room.
Yes.
So that, again, maps quite well. Not perfectly, but it does map quite well. And then with the intuition and the sensing, that maps quite well onto openness, because if you're open to the world, to new concepts, new ideas, that would suggest you have an intuition preference, which is all about creativity and concepts, ideas, being comfortable with that. And if you were low on openness, you're probably more of a sensing, practical detail, kind of wanting things to be, wanting it all to be clarified of exactly what you mean. So they do map quite well. The bit missing from type theory is the neuroticism scale. So, and this is tempered a little bit in some psychometrics where they refer to emotional stability rather than neuroticism. Because neuroticism is quite a provocative term, isn't it?
Yeah,
You're talking to a coachee about their neuroticism.
Oh, and you're quite neurotic, aren't you?
Yes.
That wouldn't go down well.
And I've seen it on some scales. I think Hogan still uses neuroticism as one of their scales. Yeah, so they do correlate quite well. So as much as there is that disagreement about whether the dimensions are valid and that's what's actually being measured, then, they're pretty much in alignment, really.
Okay. So what's your preferred measure of personality?
I like both, to be honest. And I say I've kind of come to that conclusion that they are very similar. Mm-hmm. So if you are measuring something on the Big Five, the problem with the Big Five is because it's sort of academic, that's what sits behind it. It's very difficult to find a psychometric that does it well. It tends to become more complex than people want it to be. I like a bit of complexity, but if you're sitting talking to a coachee and trying to get a bit of a handle on their personality, if you've got 16 different elements and you're kind of going through each one, they get a bit lost. They get a bit bored with themselves. So I think it can be useful, probably if you're doing corporate stuff, whether you're looking at executives and maybe some professional development, career development stuff, you might use something like Hogan, which, I say, has 16 different elements that you would look at. For people to get an idea of their personality, and really what we're trying to do in the coaching room is increase people's awareness of themselves. And that's why you would use a personality profiling tool. So if you showed them something like an MBTI report, there's 4 dimensions to it. They come out, they're scored. Once they've done their personality test, they answer 87 questions, and it gives them a score on each dimension. Some people complain that it puts them in a box. That's not the intention, but it's just to give them a better awareness of themselves, really. If you did the Big Five, if you can find a Big Five personality profile tool that actually just keeps it simple to the Big Five, then I think we're sort of measuring the same thing anyway. I'm sure people using the Big Five would go, no, that's not true. It's totally different. But yeah, that's my view. I have some experience, some understanding of it. So that's where I've arrived with it. So I do use MBTI. I'm licensed to use that. I rarely use Hogan because I find it's too complex to talk people through. I want it to be accessible for people. And being able to just talk about 4 or 5 elements is great. There are some tools that almost oversimplify it. So one of them, it has some depth to it, but it tends to get used in a very superficial way. There's one called Insights, which takes it takes 2 elements of the 4 from type theory, and you end up as fiery red or cool blue or earth green or sunshine yellow.
I think this sounds like very similar to disc profiling.
Yeah. which actually, again, it just uses two different dimensions.
Yeah.
And you get the 4 points related to that. So to me, that's an oversimplification. Again, I'm sure there are lots of insights practitioners who would say, no, it's much more complex and you can go into it in more detail. But where I come across people, they will say, oh, yeah, I'm fiery red. That's their shortcut to, and that's all they remember from having done the profile. MBTI has a slight disadvantage in that it comes out with letters. So I am ENFP, so extroverted, intuition, so that's the big picture piece, feeling and perceiving, so a bit more last minute. I know what it means. I come across people that say, yeah, I'm an INTJ. And I go, well, so what does that mean to you? And they've got no idea.
Yeah.
They just remember those were the letters that they came out with. They'll remember that they're introverted, but they probably won't remember the rest of it. So I think in terms of people understanding it, I think they'll understand it in the moment. They'll get it, but then they'll lose track of, I know I'm INTJ, but I've got no idea what it means anymore.
So all of those are going to raise some level of awareness.
And that's what we're interested in the coaching room, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Increased awareness, not only for the person of themselves, but also of the differences with other people.
Yes.
That's where it's really useful that they recognise, particularly if you've got someone that's having problems in relationships, either at home or in the workplace, that they just don't get me. They just do things differently. And I don't know why we have the expectation that everyone will see the world the way that we do, but people don't. And if they've got a different personality type, they're definitely going to see the world differently to you. And they'll have different priorities. They'll have different things that push their buttons. So, yeah, it's really useful in terms of just allowing people to understand that other people see the world differently.
So in my past, have been involved with network marketing and helping people to understand other people is really useful. And I know that within the organisation I was involved in, we would have occasionally workshops on, they didn't call it disc profiling, but it was similar to disc or insights. And people who, one of the things I love about network marketing is it brings people into a self-employed role who previously had no experience necessarily of business, and to see people's realizations and light bulb moments when they started to understand that everyone was different, that the way they saw other people and the way they were perceived, there was a reason why there was maybe conflict or misunderstanding. So it's, for me, I think only having those two elements that you mentioned, it might be oversimplification, but for some people I think it's an easy entry point into the world of personality. So I think there might be some space for that. How it's delivered and how it's understood perhaps might need some more work. But I think there's possibly room for everything here.
I don't have any problem with anyone using any personality profiling tool. I have to be careful in saying that, don't I? Because someone might just invent something that doesn't mean anything. But if someone is using DISC as a profiling tool, I'm perfectly happy with that because, as you say, it will raise their awareness of their own personality, but also the differences with other people. It will give them access to strengths that they perhaps didn't know they had. It will give them a language to be able to talk to. So if you've got someone who's, well, I'm really shy, I'm really reserved, if they can say, well, actually, I'm an introvert, and I show up in this way because I'm an introvert, that gives people a language to be able to communicate better. Yeah. So I think anything that increases people's awareness and their ability to communicate is going to be useful. So I don't want to dissuade anyone from doing any type of psychometric personality profiling. I just have my views on which I prefer, really. Yeah.
And I think also in the workplace and even in relationships, we're both ENFPs. So we both know that there could be some gaps in some planning in our relationship. But we are aware of that and we
fill the gaps.
We have to fill the gaps. So having that knowledge can be really useful. So I think I remember speaking to someone saying, they said, I've got to do this profile for a job interview and what if I'm the wrong profile? And we were reassuring them to say, it's not that you're wrong. You just need to understand yourself and understand where your strengths lie and where your weaknesses and what you do to compensate and work with what you've got.
Yeah, I did have someone that I was working with who applied for a new job and was asked by the new firm to do DISC as a profiling tool, and they didn't give her the job because she'd got the wrong profile.
Oh, I don't think that's allowed, is it?
Well,
that sounds really harsh.
It's harsh, but that was the reason. But not maybe there were other reasons for them not employing her, but that was the reason they gave, was that she had the wrong DISC profile. And obviously, it's not supposed to be used in that way. It's not designed. It is really about understanding yourself better, understanding the people in your organisation better, and it comes back to ethics and how you use it. And certainly with Myers-Briggs, it's not supposed to be used as a recruitment tool. Mm-hmm. I think it's useful as part of a recruitment process to find out more about the person and to have a conversation with them about their personality. But it's self-reporting, so they are filling out the questionnaire. So if they want to manipulate it, if you're going for a sales job and you know that sales people need to come across as extroverted and empathetic, then you might well answer the questions in a way that supports that of the view. So I think it's open to manipulation in that way. I've certainly had people on courses that I've run where they've answered it in a way that they want to be seen as that type when they're clearly not. And then you get other people that are just bloody minded and answer every... if you get to choose A and B, they'll answer every question A and go, yeah, I just wasn't interested really.
It's tricky. So as a coach in the coaching room, how could we use this information?
I think by inviting someone to do a personality profiling report, there's lots of free versions out there on the internet, so you'll be able to find something that they can do. Now, it's very difficult if you've not had any training for you to understand what's being reported back. So it may be that if they do a personality test, asking them what they make of it and how it's a good can opener to get someone talking about their personality. I mean, in that sort of continuing professional development way, I would encourage people to do some studying around personality to become familiar with it so that you can have real conversations with people about their personality. I've been so immersed in it, I just know whichever psychometric it is, I kind of know what's being said. So it's very easy for me to have conversations with people. But you have to do the work. Most of the personality profiles will give you a headline, and unless you understand it, it's difficult to hold that conversation with someone. So really useful to use in the coaching room, but you kind of got to do a bit of work to get to the place of being able to use it well with a coachee.
Would it be fair to say in conclusion or in summary, as we say of models and approaches in coaching, all personality profiling is wrong, but it might be useful or at least interesting?
Yeah, I think it's a bit like the curate's egg, good in parts. I think they all have merit, but they all have some problems. So you could say, well, the type-based stuff is oversimplistic. How can you possibly just judge someone on four? Well, you're not judging people, but assess someone on 4 different dimensions. Some of the trait stuff is overly complex. So if you've got 16 different dimensions you're working with, is that too much? And really, all we're trying to do is help someone become more self-aware.
Thank you, Tom, for your insights into insights and other personality profiling and aspects of personality. I think that's been absolutely fascinating, really useful. And next time on the podcast, we'll be talking about values.
We will be talking about values, yes.
Which I think links really nicely into personality, actually.
Yeah, in terms of increasing people's self-awareness of who they are.
Yes.
And I think values plays an important part in that.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much.
I've enjoyed that conversation this morning. Thank you very much. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.